out there, people? Welcome back to Book Review. I'm your host, Nick Cicada, and today we're talking about Not Forever, But For Now by Chuck Palahniuk, Palahniuk. I probably should have looked up how to pronounce his name before I started this video. I'm just going to call him Chuck Palahniuk for the sake of this video. And let's get going. This is Not Forever, But For Now, the official review. I saw this book at my local library every so often. It's not often at all, actually. It's very rare that I see a book on display at the library, at the main table where they display new books, that I'm like, wow, I gotta check this out. Because usually it's some crap like The Wedding Tango, the Romantic Getaway, or so on. But as it happened this October, there was a spooky book display. A lot of it also looked like crap, but this one caught my eye just because I saw it was Chuck Palahniuk, and I was like, I'm gonna give this a go. I'm in the middle of like 3 other books at this point, but I may as well give Chuck Palahniuk a go, because I've never read a single Chuck Palahniuk book before. So this book is actually my introduction to the Palahni-verse, or whatever it's called, I guess. The Palahni-verse, I don't know. I have seen Fight Club. I liked Fight Club a lot. It was a damn good movie. I had a good time watching that, but I know that the book is pretty different, and there's Fight Clubs 2 and 3. I'll get around to those someday. I feel like I should, because they are contemporary American classics. As someone who, as far as I'm aware, isn't even really capable of violence, I do find the themes explored in those books really interesting. Like that these guys have to go down to the basement and duke it out. Bam, bam. And they just like punch each other to death. It's very funny and morbid. Really interesting in a sort of way. I get why Fight Club is popular. But I haven't read Fight Club. So this book, Not Forever But For Now, is my official introduction to Chuck Palahniuk's style of writing. I used to have a friend who would only read female authors. She would not read any male authors. She wouldn't read Frank Herbert or Ray Bradbury or Kurt Vonnegut, any of the authors I recommended for her, but she would read Chuck Palahniuk. She made an exception for Chuck Palahniuk. She had, I think, Raft and Invisible Monsters and a couple of other Palahniuk books on her shelf, and didn't really get it. Now I kind of do get it. I do get why someone who doesn't read any male authors would make an exception for Chuck Palahniuk, because he's a really fun author. He's really fun to read. He's one of the best modern authors, I think. I was surprised to learn when I picked this up and opened it up to the copyright page. This is from 2023, so it's only 2 years old, actually. This is, I think, the most recent book I've ever reviewed, and that's pretty cool. It's not too often, again, that there's a book that's recent that I feel like is worth my standards. I feel like is worth reviewing because it's actually interesting. Not Forever, But For Now is that book. It's recent, it's happening, it's on the pulse of the roaring 2020s in which we find ourselves. Even though it was written during the Biden administration, it doesn't really matter, because this book is not set in America. Instead, it's set in Wales, or Britain, I guess. The characters are ostensibly Welsh, but that never really comes up in the book. I feel like that's a missed opportunity of the book. One of a couple missed opportunities is that the distinction is never really drawn between British nationality and Welsh nationality. These characters may as well just be British, because it's so seldom mentioned that they're Welsh. You almost forget half the time. I feel like that's something Chuck Palahniuk could draw on. But anyway, this book is not set in America. It's about a whole different set of characters. So I feel like when you go into this, and if you've read Fight Club especially, you should think of this as like British Fight Club. You should think of this as like Chuck Palahniuk's take on how it would be if Fight Club was in Britain. Or maybe it's just that Chuck Palahniuk is going to recycle themes and topics and ideas from his other work, and that's kind of unavoidable because that's his deal, that's his thing. All authors do it. All authors have a kind of catchphrase, trademark shtick. But this is the closest thing to Fight Club that's set in Britain. So, yeah. I looked it up on Google. I looked up some reviews for Not Forever But For Now when I was about 50 pages in, and I saw that it was getting a very divided reaction. Some people proclaimed that it was like the greatest book ever. It was a new masterpiece, one of Palahniuk's best. And then others were deriding it as like, this shit's disgusting, this book makes me sick, this book is fucking gruesome and vile, and I fucking hate it. I generally stay away from reviews like that are just so dismissive of a book with, you know, fictional characters doing fictional shit. Like, fictional characters can do anything because it's fiction, so nothing illegal's actually going on. And if you actually read this book, which is a very brisk read, I might add, I read this entire book in like 3 days. It's not long at all. I think, from what I've heard, Fight Club is a lot longer and has a lot more oomph and substance to it. This book is only around 240 pages, 238 is the official page count. So you can get through this in a reasonable amount of time. It's a very brisk read, sort of like Slaughterhouse-5. It's not difficult or anything. It doesn't have too many obscure references, which you would expect for Chuck Palahniuk, but it makes sense that there aren't too many obscure references because specifically the characters he's writing from the perspective of are like very stupid. And so you get a very like basic, simplistic language set and all of that. It's really interesting. One thing that came to mind over and over again while I was reading Not Forever But For Now is this book is like A Clockwork Orange. Like when A Clockwork Orange came out, and I know this because I've read these contemporary reviews, people were like, this book's sick, this book's disgusting, oh, there's so much vile shit in it, oh, it's gross. And nowadays A Clockwork Orange is looked back on as like an old-time classic, like a really interesting, philosophically deep sort of book that has a lot to say about the human condition. And I imagine that Not Forever But For Now will be looked back on in the same sort of way. In the coming decades, we'll look back on this like A Clockwork Orange. I really hope there isn't a movie adaptation or TV adaptation or anything. This would be difficult to translate onto screen, especially since we don't have any directors as good as like Stanley Kubrick operating currently, or Fight Club's directed by David Fincher, obviously, and I don't even know if David Fincher could do this book justice necessarily. Only because it's not quite as good as Fight Club. There's not as many ideas circulating around here, but I do feel like as a book, it could easily gain momentum and the legacy that A Clockwork Orange has. It's absolutely in the same sort of vibe. And a lot of people complain about the characters being portrayed as like young because there's these illustrations that are obviously supposed to look like some shitty British Basil Street Boys crap or whatever, but it's obviously satire. Like, this is how the characters imagine themselves. But once you get to around page 75 and you realize that the characters are actually like 30, this book becomes fucking hilarious. Once you realize that these characters are like 30, but with the mentality of like a 10-year-old, it becomes just a fucking riot. And you imagine these characters as being like, what's their names? Noel and Liam Gallagher from Oasis, you know, just these total British bastards who just think that the world is entitled to them because they're British. It's really fucking funny. Again, these characters are Welsh, but that never comes up, so I'm not sure why Palahniuk made that a key sticking point in the book jacket and all. I thought that was going to come into play a couple more times. Anyway, yeah, this book is very gross, but I mean, I would expect that from the author of Fight Club. I'd expect that from any competent horror author. You're going to run into some pretty gross shit. You're going to run into some blood and guts and viscera and some examination of the human condition. And there's really nothing in here that's any more visceral, again, than what was in A Clockwork Orange half a century ago. That's all considered like fine literature at this point. So it's just a matter of letting it age. It's very homosexual oriented. There's a lot in here about the Stonewall riots and microplastics making modern men effeminate. And if you're offended by any of that, it's just worth keeping in mind that Chuck Palahniuk is fucking gay, so he can write about homosexuality however the fuck he wants. He can write about gay relationships however the fuck he wants. And if you're offended by that, just grow the fuck up and accept that other people have different experiences than you. And Chuck Palahniuk's the author of Fight Club, so he can write about whatever the fuck he wants. Fight me. In retrospect, it actually makes a ton of sense that Chuck Palahniuk's gay, because there's a ton of homoerotic subtext with something like Fight Club, obviously. It's a bunch of sweaty guys, they go down to the basement, they punch it out. It's basically like a Ram Ranch type scenario. So with Not Forever But For Now, Chuck Palahniuk really drags that out to the extreme. He says, what if there were these two gay British brothers and they were just like totally sick and deranged and they did whatever they wanted and they were like millionaires. They killed and had it off. It's called Having It Off in here. With Clockwork Orange, again, it's the old in-out. So Chuck Palahniuk is basically just doing exactly what Anthony Burgess did. Now, some people might not like this book because Chuck Palahniuk is an American author, and here he is writing from the perspective of some British characters. But I actually think this works out fucking great, because I like to see Americans culturally appropriate Britain. Like, whenever a British person tries an American accent, I guess unless it's like a really good actor like Hugh Laurie or Lee Evans, it doesn't work out. Except Peter Serafinowicz show. That might be the only British thing I've ever seen where I actually laugh at it. But other than that, I find the British continent really dull and drab. I guess it's not a continent, it's just a fucking island. But yeah, I find them very repressed and dull. Aside from a couple cultural artifacts, I don't really think they have too much relevance to the modern day. So here Chuck Palahniuk, the bold American, strides in and says, I'm going to take Britain and just take the piss on it. And it's beautiful and wonderful to see an examination of the British psyche in this book. He really goes all in. I couldn't ask for a better deconstruction and examination of what makes Britain tick. It's a very thematically relevant point near the middle of the book where these British bastard brothers, they burn down a whole grand hall full of valuable artifacts of all kinds. It's actually called a terrible conflagration of the place, which I think is a reference to the Ray Bradbury story. I love references like that. I know it must be. Chuck Palahniuk must have read that. They say, we're the new breed, and we're getting rid of the old, and we're taking down all that used to be. The point of this passage, I think, even if Chuck Palahniuk wasn't consciously registering this, the point of this passage is that these brothers ultimately can't replace the old world because they're products of the old world. They can't grow or develop anything new because ultimately they're British, and Britain is a ethno-state, xenophobic monarchist ethno-state that is forever tied to the legacy of empire. So what Chuck Palahniuk does in this book is really brilliant. He says, these two characters are utter psychopaths. They want to burn down all of these historic artifacts. They want to destroy British history. They don't give a toss about it. It really nails the British slang in here. It's like totally spot on. I totally imagine a British accent while I'm reading this. He says these two brothers really want to erase British heritage. They don't care about it. They just care about having a go and killing people. But they ultimately can't because they're British. And that's very funny that they're caught within the context of their own time and place, and they're trying to innovate or do something new, but they really can't because they're products of like immense wealth and they're millionaires and they're caught up in this fucking manor all day. It's really, really brilliant. Like the inside dust jacket says, Downton Abbey, this is not. But this is way more fun to read than Downton Abbey. So like I say, Chuck Palahniuk really nails all the British slang in here. You got having a go, you got tosser, all kinds of fantastic slang in here, some of which I didn't even know, and I listen to British stuff a lot. They talk about how so-and-so's a Catholic every so often with the implication that they're Protestants. It's really brilliant. So there's a lot going for this book. One thing I will say about it, which is potentially a drawback, is like I said, this book is very quick. It breezes by you, it smacks you in the face, and then it's just like, okay, we're done here. And I feel like this book actually could have gone on a fair amount longer. I feel like some of the concepts in it, like the ghost forest or the like, could have been elaborated on a little bit. They could have had a little more language used to describe them. They could have been drawn out a bit. Some of the chapters are only like 2 pages. Again, that's because Palahniuk is writing from the perspective of like a really dumb character who probably doesn't know how to write like 4 pages of text. So everything is really short and choppy. It's a very accurate simulacrum. I totally buy that this is from the perspective of one of these British bastards, but at the same time, I do feel like if it was a little bit longer, maybe just like 400 pages or something, had a little more substance going on in it, this book could really have some weight. Now, like I said, this is an easy read, and you'll have a great time reading it, but around page 200, I realized that the ending was going to be super rushed, and it wasn't going to carry the weight of everything that had preceded it. I didn't find the setting or characters or substance of this book at all boring. I found it really fucking interesting, especially the perspective of these characters, like how they don't know what a cell phone is initially. I always talk about Attenborough documentaries. Attenborough is like 100 at this point. I think he's still alive. And when this was written, the Queen was still alive, and she was like over 100 or something. Got these 2 figures that kind of represent like British legacy and how old British people often get and how they sit there with their tea in hand. Oh, I'm so dainty. I colonized Africa and China to opium, and I'm so cool. So Attenborough kind of is a recurring motif in the book. He's kind of omnipresent. And then eventually he's actually a character in the book, which I think is pretty brilliant. I feel like this book could have benefited more from a perspective beyond the main character's perspective. I know that this is an unreliable narrator sort of book, and a lot of things in here obviously aren't real even within the fictional canon of this book. Like, for instance, a lot of the Judy Garland stuff just seems too outrageous for me to believe. And I think Chuck Palahniuk is kind of encouraging our skepticism. Like, this is something that these idiots have been told time and time again. It's probably not true. At the same time, stuff happens in the book from the character's perspective that is also equally unbelievable. Like the last chapter, one of the last chapters where they break into the Buckingham Palace, which I imagine has better security. They steal the Queen's ATM card. I feel like that is all made up. I feel like that's a fantasy sequence, essentially, because the rest of the book has me going along, and I totally buy it, and then at a certain point it just kind of drops off. So the ending is kind of difficult to believe. It's kind of like the British version of Fight Club, because they all just conspire and they're like, we're going to be the British Project Mayhem, mate. I just kind of don't really like how the ending is so reminiscent of Fight Club. It feels like a cop-out. I felt like the ending could have been a great deal more oomph, a little more impact. Like the inside of the dust jacket says, it could end with a nuclear detonation. And I feel like that would be more original and interesting and carry the book a lot more if the apocalypse just happened and there was an all-out nuclear detonation across the globe that these bastards started. I feel like that would be a funny way to end the book, but it doesn't end that way. It just ends with kind of a British type of fight club being formed in the prison where they go to. I feel like when the older brother, Otto, he says, we're going to go to jail now. It feels kind of like it comes out of nowhere. I don't feel like there's enough build-up to it that these characters would necessarily want to go to jail or anything. And I feel like that part is just totally rushed through. Their time in prison is just like totally, it's a breeze. You just go right through it. And it's like, Chuck, you could really elaborate on what exactly is going on here and a little more world building. I feel like that's the case. Like Fight Club like I say, I've only seen the movie, but I imagine the book is full of really cool descriptive passages. And Jack's an unreliable narrator too, the Edward Norton character, but I feel like he's a little more educated than these British characters, so I assume the Fight Club novel has a little more substance to it, a little more meat on the bone. And maybe it's just a better version of this. For what it's worth, this is an okay book. I like the unreliable narrator technique. I like the idea that these brothers are full of conspiracy theories about microplastics and everything. It's really interesting, and it does encourage skepticism. There comes a certain point where you're like, hey, this probably isn't true. They've probably just been fed a ton of bullshit over the years by their wacky grandpa. And the grandpa reminds me a lot of, like, I envision him like fucking Dick Van Dyke or something, like Bert the Chimney Sweep, but he's like this cat burglar. It's really fun shit. I just feel like it could have been elaborated on a bit more. Another thing is, like I said, I feel like this book would benefit if the characters interacted with outside people a little more, like outside of their comfort zone, because it's very insular, and that way it feels like Gormenghast or something, like they never see the outside world, but I feel like they should, and there could be a lot more comedy milked from interactions they have with people who aren't as deranged as them. The funniest point in the book, hands down, is when they run into this kid Digby at the chip shop, and he's like, I want chips. I want me fish and chips. And they're like, well, we want to have a go with you, mate. And he's like, I want me fish and chips. And this shit's fucking hilarious because it just goes on. And then eventually he has like aspirations, like, you're gonna be me best friends forever. And so the two British bastards, the two bastard brothers, are like, oh, damn, we don't want any of this. No, you're too aspirational. You have too much confidence in your life. This is a really funny insight about the human condition. Not just British, but American too, is that if you have too much confidence in yourself, try and make friends, and you're like, we're going to be friends a long time, huh? And you have a lot of confidence and faith in the bond that you share, people are going to back the fuck out. They're just going to be like, no, not today, bye. Because all these bastards really want is just to have a quick, rough sex with this kid, but actually they just end up leaving him. I thought that shit was fucking hilarious. It's a lot like, again, A Clockwork Orange, where Alex just kind of realizes that all the edgy shit he's getting up to is totally futile, no one gives a shit, and he has to move on and grow the fuck up and stop being a little juvenile, delinquent bastard. It's very reminiscent of that. They get tired of all their escapades, and they're like, oh, damn it, this fucker wants a life and shit. Oh, damn it, he's not just a sex object, damn it. I thought that was really interesting and speaks a lot to the human condition. Like, if you present yourself as a living person, not just as like a thing to be used, people generally avoid you a great deal because you have aspirations that are too high. And I felt like that was one of the funniest scenes in the book. But then during the rushed ending, Chuck Palahniuk totally botches it by bringing this character back. I felt like it would have worked so much better if this character was never mentioned again. He's just totally left at the fish and chips shop with the fish and chips in his hand. I felt like that would have been the perfect way to leave this character. So even if he doesn't actually come back, because the couple last chapters of the book do just feel like an elaborate fantasy sequence, I feel like it would have worked better if this character was not brought back, because the whole point of him is that he's just forgotten and left in the dust because he has too much ambition in a world where these two bastards, they just want to have a quick go at it. They don't care about ambition or anything, because they've never had to work for anything. They come from the upper class, the upper crust, the millionaire abbey or whatever. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot of missed potential with that. Also, with the rushed ending. So those two things, even if the chip shop scene is like fucking comedy gold once you get to it, it's your little treat for having eked out 150 pages, and you're like, man, it's going to be smooth sailing from here. I feel like the ending is like totally rushed. Also that, like, their butler's crushed, and their mom marries their I guess not even half brother, just like extra type sibling. That could have been gone into a lot more. There's a lot of story threads that feel half baked or not quite finished in here. So I will say that about the book. If there's one thing to dislike about it, it's not that it's a horror book and there's guts and viscera and shit. That's a convention, a staple of the genre. What I don't like about it is there's just like a lot of stuff that doesn't really go anywhere, and I feel like it could have been built on and built on and built on. You know, like Fight Club. From the Fight Club movie alone, it's like it just goes on and on. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine where one thing leads to another, and it just gets bigger and bigger until it reaches this explosive fucking crescendo. That could have been done so easily with this, but it's just really not. I feel unsatisfied after reading it. But like I say, I'm not too upset because it was a nice breeze, and I got through it in a decent amount of time. So it's not like Chuck Palahniuk wasted my time at all. There's enough in this book that can just be considered maybe not like the definitive Chuck Palahniuk book, but probably an enduring classic and just a nice little bit of pulp fun. It's not necessarily meant to be the deepest or most provocative or most insightful on the human condition, which all novels should, in a sense, be. They should say something about human nature and all. But maybe this one is just for fun. And, you know, I can't really fault Chuck Palahniuk for that. Maybe just one day he was like, I want to write as a British character. And it works pretty good, I have to say. I totally buy into that these characters are British, and they have a British-type mindset and all. I totally buy that. I don't feel like any of the stuff in here is remotely dated. I feel like his commentary on the internet and modern times and all is very insightful. I feel like even though Chuck Palahniuk is kind of a little older at this point, he's reaching, 60, and Fight Club came out in the 90s, and that was probably the peak of his success. There's probably not going to be a Palahniuk adaptation that reaches that level of infamy. I feel like he's not out of date. He's still very much with it. He's still very much got his finger on the pulse of culture and all. And I feel like in terms of books of the 2020s, it's going to go down as like, again, maybe not an all-time classic, but definitely up there. People's opinions of it will warm over time as they realize how fun it is. It's a real romp from beginning to end. There are so many themes in here that are delivered on, especially the Attenborough one. It starts on page 1 with the Attenborough monologue, and then at the end they actually go and see him. There's a point where the older brother Otto is like, why don't you save these fucking animals, mate? And David Attenborough's like, oh, I just can't. That's fucking hilarious. That scene, too, is like real comedy gold. I expected that maybe Attenborough would do something outrageous, like it would go into another fantasy sequence and everything would be amplified, like it is with the scene with Queen at the end. It's very realistic, like Attenborough obviously just considers these two completely crazy. That's very funny. It's really funny to see the perspectives of these deranged characters contrast with, like, the real world outside, which presumably exists, but then it's hard to tell the line between what's real and what's fake. But I feel like this book could have benefited a lot more from more interactions between these two brothers and the outside world, like the actual outside world, not just like their little village, but like London and Liverpool and, you know, whatever big British cities. That potential is not effectively delivered on. I feel like the subplot with the tutor, what to say about him, I feel like he could have been a little more fleshed out. I feel like the commentary on religious people are always sexually repressed, and here he's like got all these sexual impulses that are built up. I feel like it's not as interesting as the main story. I feel like also that the tutor's name is Digby. I feel like that's just too far of a stretch. His death scene also feels very like anticlimactic. It feels like it just kind of comes out of nowhere. There's not enough build-up to it, and he as a character is not developed enough. I feel like it would be much funnier with the dynamic if he just kind of stayed like the straight person to contrast with the deranged goings-on of these bastard brothers. You know, like Abbott and Costello, that creates a funny dynamic, tested strategy. But maybe Chuck Palahniuk was trying to subvert that and say, you know, anyone who gets within range of these two is going to end up just completely deranged and perverse. I don't know. But anyway, I don't feel like that subplot is necessarily too interesting. I will say, if you're going into Not Forever But For Now with the expectation of like some deep meditation on conspiracies or government cover-ups, or here's how this event happened, here's how this assassination happened, you're not going to get it from Not Forever But For Now. The X-Files, this is not. There is no thought given to the world building or how do these conspiracies happen or why do these celebrities die. Because basically every celebrity is killed by these brothers' family, it turns out. Like every single one. Chris Farley, Phil Hartman. How the heck is Phil Hartman even like a death anyone suspects anything about? As far as I know, he's not. It's very cut and dry as to what happened in Phil Hartman's case. But this book just says these brothers did everything. They did 9/11. They did Princess Diana. It's a big sinned up and roast. None of it is meant to be taken seriously. Obviously, it's completely implausible. It's just a big joke. I feel like Chuck Palahniuk is also kind of taking the piss on like James Bond here, you know, the British power fantasy where he's all macho and he does all this crazy spectacle shit. So like, what if it was like evil James Bond, right? What if their grandpa was like the evil version and he just does all this messed up, fucked up shit? Not for MI5. It's never explained exactly who is behind it or who's pulling the strings, which obviously it'd be impossible to explain something this cracker's banana, exactly how it works or what the order of operations is. But it's just meant to be a good fun, a good send up of conspiracy theories, a funny jest. So I feel like in that regard it absolutely succeeds, and I feel like Chuck Palahniuk obviously knows quite a bit about the given conspiracy theories, but he's just writing for fun. So it's not meant to be taken seriously or anything. The last thing I should mention that I really like about Not Forever But For Now is the kind of timelessness of it. I do feel like that's a really charming factor, that you're not sure exactly the order in which events took place, like when their dog died or when their pony died or whatever. It's kind of a muddle, and no dates are given to anything, and the world outside is kept kind of vague, and you don't know exactly what time things are happening. I really like books and movies that do that can apply to multiple points in time instead of just one point in time. Obviously, Fight Club is very firmly set in the late 90s, 1999 specifically, right before 9/11. Not Forever But For Now, even though it does feel like the 2020s while I read it, I do like that some of the events, since these characters are like 30 years old but think they're 10, I feel like they could really happen at any point. Like you can imagine some of this stuff happening concurrently with Fight Club. Like if you take the Chuck Palahniuk's books all take place in the same universe, like some of them are happening while Tyler Durden is out there. And that's kind of inspiring, you know, that's kind of fun to consider. I like the timelessness of it. One of my favorite movies, Mouse Hunt, is set in a vague, weird mishmash of all the decades, and it's a lot of fun. As a result, you don't know exactly what time it's set in. And I feel like Not Forever But For Now has a similar sort of vibe. It uses people like Attenborough, obviously, because he's been relevant for so fucking long, just like decades and decades, like narrating wildlife documentaries since like the 70s, right? So really, in any point in time, these things could have happened, and it takes a little bit to memorize when something happened, what happened, where. I like that. It's kind of a little puzzle. So I gotta give Not Forever But For Now credit on that aspect. It's a beautiful piece of storytelling, and it's quite a bit of fun to figure out exactly when what happened and all. So the time on my camera has almost run out. What do I give Not Forever But For Now by Chuck Palahniuk? Well, I'm gonna give Not Forever a 7 out of 10. I would give it higher, I really would, but I imagine if I read Fight Club or Raft or any of those, I would probably think better of them. like they would hit me more. I feel like this probably is a pretty weak offering as far as Palahniuk's work goes, but at the same time, I feel like anyone who says that this book goes too far or ooh, it's too edgy, just an inhibited stick in the mud. Like seriously, just open your palate, expose yourself to new ideas. This shit's interesting. It's interesting because it's innovative and boundary pushing and it tries new shit. Like I say, the ending is a little bit regurgitative of Fight Club. I feel like it's rushed too, which obviously detracts some points. And this book does feel pretty fast. It feels like there's a lot that could have been gone into and should have been gone into, but just isn't, and that's a real missed opportunity and a weakness of the book, and I have to take that into account when calculating my final score. If there are weaknesses to a book, I do have to take them into account. But this book is a lot of fun. It's a real romp through and through, and if you get past the first few chapters, which feel kind of like a boring slog and don't necessarily carry the weight and excitement and fun of the later chapters where things really get juicy, then yeah, I mean, if you can get past that, this is a brisk fucking read, easy, and you can get through it in no time flat. Yeah, Not Forever But For Now is a 7 out of 10 book, which is still pretty high, decent, respectable, British and all, and I feel like Palahniuk's sojourn into British literature really paid off. I feel like I'm glad I read this book. It's damn interesting, and yeah. Okay, so that's my review of Not Forever But For Now. I've been Nick Cicada. More content down below and on the spot and all of that, and more book reviews out soon, and buy Nicholas comics and all of that, and more literature forever. I'll catch you in the next one. So long, suckers. Sayonara, suckers. That's my old catchphrase. Sporsh, too, I guess. They're both my catchphrase. Whatever. I don't even know anymore.